Okay, from the director of Zombie Apocalypse comes a movie about an earthquake in St. Louis. Yes, yes, the earth will tremble. Here you see the old courthouse crumbling. The waters will rise. There's the Mississippi. The brave will fight. Here are the brave guys. And this is a movie called Continental Split.
We have to stop this quake. Otherwise, millions will die.
Millions will die. Well, it's a movie, so the story is the wife is a seismologist. The husband is in charge of fracking in Missouri. Fracking is supposed to cause this big earthquake, and the seismologist wants to save St. Louis, but the marriage is crumbling. Their daughter wants to leave St. Louis, and as you know, if you've watched movies recently, at the end, of course, St. Louis will be saved and the marriage will be saved and the daughter will still be living in St. Louis. It's on Hulu. It's free, but every review says don't bother watching it. Anyway, called Continental Split, that earthquake in St. Louis will cause the United States to split in half. Earthquakes in St. Louis and Missouri. I'm Doug Schneider, and Earthquake Awareness Month is February, but right now, wherever you are, the ground beneath your feet is in constant motion. We're going to talk with the big one. That's where we're going to start. 1812, the New Madrid earthquake in St. Louis. The chimneys fell. We felt the ground vibrate. It's 164 miles from New Madrid. Up here, there's the Jared Mansion. It's over in Cahokia Heights. The rear wall has a crack in it, a memento of that earthquake. This building, by the way, was the first brick building in Illinois. Now, how about Louisville, Kentucky? It seemed as if the surface of the earth was afloat. It's 290 miles from New Madrid. In Cincinnati, furniture moved around and people got dizzy. In Detroit, Michigan, the temperature rose. This is all from the 1812 New Madrid earthquake. They felt it in Savannah. And it is said, we don't know for sure, that President Madison felt it in the White House. Baltimore, Maryland, buckled sidewalks. Norfolk, Virginia, clock stopped. Church bells rang in Boston. That's 1,278 miles away from New Madrid, but almost 2,000 miles away, they felt this in Montreal. So here's a general diagram of the 1812 events. Notice up here, it's 1811 to 1812. It's more than just one earthquake. It started, these earth tremors and events started in December 1811, went to February 1812. They shook, rattled, and rolled Missouri. Yes. I'm here showing that there were really three big ones, but lots and lots of small earthquakes in between. And they named it after New Madrid. And the size of this earthquake, you could see it damaged 200,000 square miles of territory. Now, didn't damage everything there, but damage was seen there. You could perceive this earthquake over 2 million square miles. And in the Mississippi River Valley, there were physiographic changes. We'll see what those were. And note, though the 1906 San Francisco earthquake is more famous, our earthquake was 10 times larger. And in both cases, there was no Richter scale yet. So we had to rely, before the Richter scale, we had to rely on people's just mementos and memoirs about earthquakes, how big they were. Now, this earthquake series went on for so long. It's probably the longest earthquake series in the known history of the world. Well, what happens during this earthquake? Sulfur is a nasty smell. This vapors rose from the ground, smelling of sulfur, and you could hear thunder, you could hear the river roar, and the earth moved as if you were on the sea, and the air became dark and foggy, especially dangerous for people who are trying to get away from the earthquake, trying to get to another town. What did people feel? They felt nauseated, they felt dizzy, buildings moved, logs shifted, walls cracked, the town of Little Prairie completely disappeared. And New Madrid had to move because New Madrid sank. It is no longer in the same location. It's moved to what is higher ground now, still on the river. Animals very much sensed this earthquake, and their behavior changed. Wild animals became tame. Snakes came out of the ground. Flocks of ducks landed near people. Animals bleated and birds screeched. And in one household, it was written that they let the hogs out of their hog pen because the hogs were just going crazy. And the people just didn't know what to do. So they let them out of the pen. And then the hogs went wild. But the horses stood still. They would not move. And the dogs howled and let you know the night before an earthquake was to come. Well, sand blows also occurred and during this earthquake. Here you can see the sand coming up out of the ground, and it's also called a sand volcano or sand boil, and it's what remains from that shooting of liquefied sand up into the air. You get a mound of sand, looks like this. And that's the liquefied sand coming up through a fissure and winding up on the earth. And that photograph is modern, not ancient. And here is New Madrid from the air. And you can see the sand blows there. And the biggest sand blow in the country is near Hayti, Missouri, 1.5 miles long. Also, tar balls will appear. And tar balls are petroleum that's been solidified. Petroliferous nodules, or tar balls is an easier name to use. And underneath the ground, something's happening. This happens to be a picture of the Bonne Terre mine. And I was told by people who've been on the tour of the mine that they pointed out evidence of the New Madrid earthquake. I don't know exactly what that evidence was, but this photograph is from an article written by Ken Jennings, who you will know as the host of Jeopardy! He wrote a fairly scholarly article about the New Madrid earthquake. Well, the land will sink, and when it sinks, tree roots get exposed. So here you have the tree that survived the earthquake, and its roots are exposed. Interesting phenomenon, earthquake lights. And here you see earthquake lights in the shape of a funnel, so to speak. But they can also be in other shapes and also can be near volcanoes as well as near earthquakes. And here they are in the shape of balls. They can also be streamers, steady glow, and no one really knows the cause of these earthquake lights. Here's another example of a very bright earthquake light. The earthquake in 1812 also changed the course of the Mississippi River and created the Kentucky bubble. And this is a little geographic oddity. You used to be able to go from this part of Kentucky over to the other part of Kentucky by land, but you can't do that without leaving Kentucky to get from the bubble to the main part of Kentucky. You have to go through this pink area, which is Tennessee. That bubble at one time was a thriving agricultural area. Today, it is pretty much deserted with only a couple dozen people living in this bubble. And that bubble is an enclave, meaning it's a territorial unit enclosed in a foreign territory. Lakes were created. The most famous lake, Reelfoot Lake. Look at the size of that guy. That is 15,000 acres, created by the earthquake in 1812. Now, most activity happened on the river, the Mississippi River, for that earthquake. And there were just all sorts of things going on. Forests just fell into the water. Boats and their hapless crews and passengers were overturned, and many people drowned. And the most deaths in 1812 were on the Mississippi River. And they had waterfalls for 2 or 3 days. And the boats would come over the falls and just tumble and people would die. And even if you were moored on the riverbank, your boat could be just grabbed and pulled into the river. The river is higher than normal. It turned black in color, large waves. It wiped out islands, but it created islands as well. Here we have what's going on that river. But the most famous statement about the Mississippi River in 1812 is that it ran backwards. And here's a book with that title, When the Mississippi Ran Backwards. But notice it's a book about intrigue and murder, so it's more of a sensational book. But when you think about it, the river running backwards, think about something happening underneath the river that causes things to shoot up. And this running backwards only happened for a few hours, but think of sloshing. Yes, think of dropping a brick into a bathtub. And you'll see that brick is sending up waves in two directions. And this is what happened with the Mississippi. That event, the seismic event in the river, caused water to run south and to run north. And if you're running the water north, you are going against the flow, so the river runs backwards. In the midst of all this, Robert Fulton is trying to promote his steamboat, and he has the first steamboat in the West traveling in 1812 down the Mississippi from Pittsburgh to New Orleans. And here is the steamboat, which is called the New Orleans, in calm waters, but it is heading right towards the New Madrid earthquake zone. And the pilot is actually Teddy Roosevelt's granduncle. So this steamboat comes into the area where all this turmoil is happening. They see that New Madrid has been destroyed. They are not picking up survivors. They don't want to get overrun. They don't have supplies. They just move on. They tie up at an island, and the island sinks during the night. The ship's dog just barking all night long, and they finally did reach New Orleans. And of course, the steamboat era was then starting on the Mississippi. All right, so New Madrid has sunk into the river. There's no, if you had land, you own land, that land is basically under the river, destroyed, and there are now going to be compensation. Land certificates are created, and this certificate gives you title to an equal piece of land somewhere else in Missouri. And that happened in 1815. It took 3 years for someone to figure out a relief system. And these certificates are bought up by speculators. It's doesn't benefit everybody who lost land. Here's an example of if you were materially injured by earthquakes. Yes. Now, Charles Lucas, he did receive a grant. He got land northwest of St. Louis because he lost land in the New Madrid earthquake. He used his certificate and created a town. And that town in North St. Louis County is Normandy. So Normandy was born of the disaster at New Madrid. Modern seismology. Well, if you go back to ancient seismology, Socrates and Aristotle and so forth, there are all sorts of off-the-wall explanations for earthquakes. But we are in the modern age, which basically began in the 1700s, and we believe in science. So 1700s are the age of enlightenment, and something happened in Lisbon, Portugal in 1755. This was All Saints' Day. It's November 1st. So there are candles that are lit in churches and homes throughout Lisbon. And here's an example of candles in a church. And then an earthquake, estimated to be 8.5 on the Richter scale, 6 minutes long. Fissures open up in the city center. Then the buildings start to crumble, and people are panicking. People are panicking. The center of the city is not safe. They run to the riverfront, or the seafront in this case. It's a river that goes right into the sea. And they go to the docks. The sea recedes, and they just see all this mud, lost cargo and shipwrecks, but 40 minutes later, a giant tsunami comes and wipes out the harbor and the downtown in Lisbon. So here you have all this tragedy going on in 1755. If the building was not knocked down by the earthquake, there are candles in almost every building in Lisbon, and those candles are going to get knocked over, and there would be a firestorm burned most of the remaining buildings in Lisbon. So if you weren't damaged by the earthquake, by the tsunami, there would also be the firestorm, all hitting Lisbon at the same time. A huge number of people died, and 85% of the city destroyed. If this is the best of all possible worlds, what are the other worlds, says Voltaire. So what we get from this, because it's the Age of Enlightenment, is that people decide that they are going to study earthquakes, study them scientifically, and so you now have the birth of modern seismology and earthquake engineering, which is how to build structures that will resist earthquakes to some extent. Now, measuring an earthquake, Lisbon was 1755, didn't have ways to measure earthquakes then, but here's Charles Richter. We know that name, the Richter scale. There's his seismograph. That is it. That's the original one. And this was 1935. The Richter scale was invented. So up until 1935, we didn't have an actual number where we could describe an earthquake. And on the Richter scale, anything 1, 2, 3, and 4 is fairly light. But you get up to 5, you might hear a glassware tinkle in your kitchen. But when you get to 6, you're going to get damage. And 7 is serious. 8 is extremely serious and very, very destructive. So that is the Richter scale. But this scale is no longer used, except by newspapers, because you know the Richter scale and I know the Richter scale. We're unfamiliar with this other scale. So basically, they just put numbers in newspapers and in website articles and just might mention M. Not R for Richter, but M. M for moment magnitude. And this was developed in the 1970s. It's a new way of measuring. I noticed a Japanese seismologist and an American seismologist named Tom Hanks. This moment magnitude scale matches the Richter scale when you get up to about the number 5. Then after 5, they differ, but still don't differ that much because after 5, both scales say you got a bad earthquake on your hands here. So now we talk about the Richter scale, but scientists use the moment magnitude scale. We're in a seismic zone. Here it is, the New Madrid Fault, going from Little Rock up to St. Louis, and it's a zone, deep-seated faults in the Earth's crust that zigzag through Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, and Kentucky. And notice this wording here, poorly understood. Our earthquake zone is poorly understood because we are not in California. Out in California, you have tectonic plates that are rubbing against each other, and people study these tectonic plates, and this gives them an understanding of what's going on. We don't have tectonic. We're in the middle of a tectonic plate. So it's really hard to understand what's going on way down there in the Earth's crust when we're in the middle of a tectonic plate. Here's a map with some of the recent earthquakes in our seismic zone. And so we have rock covered with unstable alluvial material. That's material from rivers. That's the nature of our environment here. And it's our fault. Yes, you can buy this t-shirt on Amazon if you like. So we have the New Madrid seismic zone. There's another seismic zone nearby, the Wabash Valley, and we're near 2 seismic zones. the Center for Earthquake Studies that was at Southeast Missouri State University. Due to budget cuts, they lost their Center for Earthquake Studies. I did talk to someone who was a student at Southeast Missouri, and she was there when an earthquake hit, and she was in the ladies' room, and she just ran. And as she ran, all the toilets flushed. She didn't stop to see whether they were flushing up or just flushing as normal. She was just running to get out of there. St. Louis, you want to feel an earthquake? You can do that whenever you want. Just go to the St. Louis Science Center. Here's the earthquake exhibit, and this room will shake for you. You can feel that earthquake just as you ask for it at the Science Center. Now, speaking of earthquakes in St. Louis, we made earthquake bombs at Skull and Steel. Skull and Steel building is still there. This is a Lego earthquake bomb, and it gives you a sense of the size of an earthquake bomb. A traditional bomb dropped to the surface, it explodes on the surface and destroys the target with force going outward through the air. But an earthquake bomb is different. And this building, still on Manchester Road, made earthquake bombs for the Royal Air Force to drop on Europe. And the earthquake bomb is dropped from a high altitude. It's very, very high speed, penetrates the ground, and explodes underground. And this causes shock waves. And this is going to help destroy buildings that have strong underground structures in Germany and the other Axis powers. Here we are on Manchester Road back in World War II. These are earthquake bombs being made. Here's a 6-ton earthquake bomb being loaded somewhere. And we helped win the war. Now, earthquake, what about our arch? Now, the National Park Service says the arch is designed to sway and will sway as much as 18 inches. And in a normal condition, the arch doesn't really sway. You'd have to get a 50-mile-an-hour wind to move the top of the arch 1.5 inches. And they basically say the arch does not sway, but it's built to sway, and it's built to withstand an earthquake. The Gateway Arch can withstand an earthquake unless it's in a B movie. That's right, like Continental Split. Then your arch will crumble. But otherwise, we can feel that it's safe. We have a spy agency here in St. Louis. Got 1,000 people who work as spies at the NGA. The NGA provides material, mapping material, and it's used, for example, on your cell phone when you ask for maps. That NGA supplies those maps. And, aircraft, when they fly, require this, and all sorts of things, including responding to national disasters. And we're talking about earthquakes. And the NGA in St. Louis. The NGA is in St. Louis, but the main building is in Washington, D.C. Here is the main building in St. Louis, Missouri. So there are 3 NGA buildings, Washington, St. Louis, and the third one is Arnold, Missouri. And look at the St. Louis in the center. These are old buildings, sort of the old armory cobbled together, an arsenal. It's the old arsenal cobbled together. The Arnold building you see is new. We know that the NGA is moving to North St. Louis in the next couple of years. I am only going to guess that the building in Arnold will stay as it is because it is a modern building built to exactly what they need, and they wouldn't need to move anywhere. But the older buildings in St. Louis are hard for modern needs. Anyway, that's the NGA, and they mapped the underwater earthquake in Sumatra, which is a giant island in Indonesia, 2004. This earthquake killed 228,000 people. And we in St. Louis helped tell the people handling the emergency over there in Southeast Asia what was going on, because we had the mapping and could provide information. 14 countries were affected by that earthquake. So if you want to study seismology, you have a choice of two universities, and they won't always call it seismology. If you go to WashU, you'll get a degree in Earth, Environmental, and Planetary Sciences. And here you can see these people are WashU students in the South Pacific researching undersea earthquakes. Or you can go to SLU. The bachelor's degree is called Geoinformatics and Geospatial Analytics, while the master's and PhD is called Geoscience. They don't want to say earthquake, it's much bigger than earthquakes. And SLU had an earthquake center. 1909, they got the first seismograph in the New Madrid seismic zone. And here they're very proud. They published a book about it in 1911, and they had 47 seismographs in the zone measuring things for the United States Geologic Service. Here's a seismograph. And this center, the earthquake center at SLU, is now closed. So something's going on when Southeast Missouri loses its earthquake center and SLU loses its earthquake center. 1990, we had an earthquake panic. Another long day at the Bureau of Earthquake Prediction. It's going to be one down. No, maybe. Oh, all right, okay. It's just tough to predict, especially here in Missouri. But this guy said he could predict. And he predicted a 50% chance of a magnitude 7. Now, it doesn't matter which scale you're on, 7 is really bad. And he had a date, December 3rd, 1990, and it would happen basically around New Madrid. And here is the guy, Ivan Browning, and the media, of course, picks up on his prediction, and there's this panic all around Missouri and focused on New Madrid, and then people start to prepare. And this guy, although in later life, he says he's a climatologist, he's really a zoologist. And as you know, that earthquake did not happen, but people were waiting for it. Here's Wilco. They're a rock band from Belleville, Illinois, and they're going to sing you a song called New Madrid.
There's a man with conviction, and although he's getting old, Mr. Browning has a prediction, and we've all been told. So come on back from New York City, roll your trucks in at dawn, walk with me to the fountain and hold onto my arm. You did. Roll me under New Madrid. Shake my baby up, please bring her back.
So there's this panic, and what does the town of New Madrid do? They discover that the media is just going to basically come down and make a big to-do about the upcoming earthquake. So here you have television news and the locals selling them barbecue ribs in New Madrid. And actually, the New Madrid residents just got tired of all this TV coverage, and the TV crews ran out of residents to interview. They had to interview other TV crews. And here's one person, a native of New Madrid, more afraid of being run over by a TV truck than being hit by an earthquake. And of course, it didn't happen. Didn't happen. But we were in the zone up in St. Louis. We got all the information. And here is somebody who was in first grade at the time. Her mother made an earthquake kit, put it in a trash can outside the garage, food, canned food, and an opener, water, and a first aid kit awaiting that earthquake. And yet, although people seem to think this prediction was kind of bonkers, we lived in a fault zone, and therefore anything is possible. Here's the Riverfront Times making fun of people who took this seriously, but it was taken seriously. Some people moved out of St. Louis, some businesses closed, some factories closed. This is for that date when the earthquake was to take place. Here's an earthquake survival guide. Daycares closed, schools had held earthquake drills, and believe it or not, a bank bought body bags for all the employees they expected to get killed by this earthquake in 1999. And then people bought insurance. And of course, that earthquake didn't happen. Not sure what you do with a whole bunch of unused body bags. But insurance sales, earthquake insurance is available to people in Missouri because it can happen. It can happen. And 17 companies have stopped writing earthquake insurance, but 8 have started writing earthquake insurance. Here, dear, did you feel the earthquake? Uh-huh. And one person said, yes, you should buy insurance. Figured that his house will just be pancaked, and instead of having the government fix it, he'll have insurance fix it, and that gives him reassurance. But here's someone else who says, no, don't bother to buy insurance. It'll be so tragic. There'll be so much damage. The insurance won't make a difference. In any event, it's your choice whether to have earthquake insurance. But if you live in New Madrid, this is scary. Earthquake insurance has risen 760% since the year 2000 if you live in New Madrid. Well, we know that about earthquakes. We know we're in an earthquake zone, and we have earthquake building codes. Here is a house on springs. Yes, it's 100% earthquake proof. But in 1990, the Missouri Senate says all public buildings are to be built to withstand earthquakes. That's in only 49 counties, would be, of course, in the eastern part of Missouri, not in the western part. I talked to someone who works for GMA Architects and asked her, what does this architecture firm do when they're building a public building and having to meet this requirement from the Senate bill? And the architect said, you have codes in each locality, and they vary, but these codes are for earthquake resistance. And you have to build according to what the locality says. These are public buildings now. And she said they will have walls that have expansion joints. And that means the walls will kind of move and sway and not fall down during an earthquake. But the most important thing is special ceilings. These are seismic ceilings, because your danger from an earthquake is right above your head at the moment. If you look up, you've got a nice, pretty ceiling, but what's underneath all those nice, pretty ceiling boards? All sorts of stuff is up there in the ceiling, and it's going to fall on you. So they put in seismic ceilings, GMA people. Merchants Bridge, here's an example of a change to deal with earthquakes. It's a very old bridge. It's up North County near the Freedom Crossing, and they did a big renovation. There's the bridge, and they wanted to keep the bridge functioning during earthquakes, and that's important because this is a train bridge, and you need trains to get here because to keep this city going. The Robert A. Young Building, This is downtown, and they got a big award for 62 million be from the government, and they worry about this building being vulnerable during an earthquake, and the federal government was alarmed by that. Here's the building. The thing is, if that building comes down, you have lots of people working in it, and you're going to be in downtown St. Louis and block rescue efforts. So they have they have redone the building supposedly to resist earthquakes. Ironically, that's the building where the Army Corps of Engineers is headquartered, at least the local Army Corps of Engineers. This is kind of new, insulated concrete forms. Here you see a guy building a wall with these, and these are concrete plus steel, and they're kind of new, ICF, and they provide stiffness, strength, and ductility. Ductility is the ability to have a shape change without losing its strength or breaking. And of course, that's what happens during an earthquake is if things don't change, they crumble and fall. So these houses here that you're looking at, built with ICF, and I believe built in the basement with ICF. And supposedly the safest structures to be in for an earthquake. Now, have you heard of the Pensmore Mansion? One of the biggest houses in the United States, and it's in Missouri. And it's built with ICF, 72,000 square feet for this house. And it's designed to withstand not just earthquakes, but withstand being bombed. Yes, and of course withstand tornadoes. 14 bathrooms, yes. And there it is. It's near Highlandville, Missouri. You may or may not have heard of Highlandville, but you can be assured that Highlandville doesn't have building codes, and therefore this was one of the places chosen. This place was chosen to build this giant house. We have federal earthquake organizations. This one, CUSEC, is designed for us in the Midwest, Central U.S. Earthquake Consortium, and they basically coordinate all the smaller earthquake efforts at the state level and the county level to have a central place where everyone can communicate. And they put on various training sessions. You can see Cape Girardeau, you can see St. Louis 3 times, Florida is here, Baltimore is here, but those were national things, not local for the central United States. So that's the federal level. This is also the federal level, USGS, the Geological Survey. And this is basically information, making lists and gathering information. And their information tells them we've had 177 new magnitude quakes in 2024 so far. And this was in July, 177 so far. At the state level, we have SEMA, State Emergency Management Agency. This is the Department of Natural Resources, and they do a big earthquake summit every year. This year it was in Cape Girardeau. And what do you talk about at an earthquake summit? You've got the latest geology. I used to think geology was like all sort of solid, but no, there's new geology that wipes out the old geology. Anyway, if an earthquake strikes, how do you get people around? How do you transport things? What do hospitals do if there's an earthquake? How to communicate if there's an earthquake? What do you deal with hazardous material if there's an earthquake? All these sessions at the earthquake seminar here. The county level, Boone County talks about how there's 1 million earthquakes every year in the country, not in Boone County. And St. Charles talking about their questions about fault zones and seismic activity, but we do have earthquake activity. Questions. Remember, we are not at the end of a tectonic plate. We're in the middle of a tectonic plate. So there are questions. There are questions. St. Louis County talks about death, and your casualties result from falling objects, from what's up there in the ceiling, where you're sitting right now at the moment. And the St. Louis City said the earthquake strike without warning, any time of year, any time of day or night, no real way to predict them. So they are sitting on a powder keg, And these county emergency responders take this very seriously, very seriously. Now, if you are in an earthquake, this is old stuff, standing in a doorway. This is when I lived in Seattle back in the 70s. What should you do if there's an earthquake? Everybody said, get in a doorway. This is not the best place to be. The best place to be is if you drop to the ground, or to the floor, if you're indoors, and go under something that will protect you from the debris that is going to injure you and perhaps kill you. And then you hold on to whatever is saving you from the debris. In this case, a nice strong table is suggested. So get on your hands and knees. You want if your hands on knees, you can still move, because actually the table you're holding onto will be moving. So you want to move with it. And if you don't have anything on any table or desk to get underneath, use your hands and arms to cover your head. That's the best thing to do. And hold on to this table or desk, and that table just might move, so move with it. Here's an example. You see this woman and her child, and she is under a table. See, her right hand is on that table leg, and she's kneeling so she can move as the table moves, and that's her protection from whatever's falling from her ceiling. Bill Mathias, when I was in Seattle, we did have an earthquake, and he was walking down the street with his young twin daughters downtown, and the earthquake hit. It was not a big one, but he moved his daughters into a building, the lobby of a building, and said, "Oh, it's only an earthquake." And what Bill did was he was calm, because he didn't want his daughters to freak out. So this is another thing you should keep in mind, is to just be calm if you are in an earthquake, especially if you're around other people. Well, will there be another big one? I think you know the answer, but let's take a look. Let's take a look at an earthquake that just hit St. Louis along the New Madrid Fault. Here are all these people, all these casualties. And St. Louis has infrastructure that's aging, not getting any younger, more casualties. And bridges have collapsed, roads are twisted, buildings are crumbling, more casualties. And when the rumbling stops, first responders come into the city, they do search and rescue, and discover in Busch Stadium, whoops, here's one of the rescue vehicles. In Busch Stadium, there are 40,000 people trapped. You got to get them out of Busch Stadium. How do you do that? There we go. You lower them by rope to the outside of Busch Stadium. All right. This was a dense urban terrain emergency exercise. It happened here in the summer. The National Guard performed it in July of this year. This piece of equipment was not in that exercise, but it has been invented. And this is a device that provides internet and cell phone service where an area is hit with a disaster. And you can just imagine how helpful cell phones would be. If you don't have a cell phone, you're just at a loss for information. So having cell phone service is a necessity. Well, having St. Louis hit by an earthquake, the size of the New Madrid earthquake of 1812, you want to read about it? It hasn't happened yet, but it will happen if you read these books. They're disaster thrillers based on events that haven't happened yet. 8.4, this is a disaster thriller about an earthquake hitting St. Louis and New Madrid and the whole New Madrid Fault. Well, here's a book. It's just called New Madrid. It's a disaster thriller about what would hit here in Missouri. And then here's The Rift, off the Richter scale and into history. Here's the New Madrid Run. Look at that rift. The earthquake in St. Louis, the New Madrid fault line, will break our country in half. That's one of the ideas about what this big disaster would be. So here is a book about that, breaking the country in half. And here's one that's just called New Madrid, and it's another disaster thriller. So let's see about anticipating the big one. And basically, we're not on a plate boundary. So scientists don't understand as much about earthquakes here as in California. And earthquakes, totally unpredictable, but they do make predictions. Here's what would happen in St. Louis visually. We're hit by an earthquake on that magnitude. St. Louis would become uninhabitable. There's Busch Stadium crumbling, $300 billion in damage in Missouri, 1 million buildings crumbled, 2 million households without power for days. And there's the zoo in the middle of everything going on. So destruction up to 20 states, billions of dollars in damage at a population center. Back in 1812, there basically was no population center. There were places that had a fair number of people, but not like we have today. So this New Madrid-sized quake would be very disastrous. So what do scientists say about big one? 20 to 40% chance of a magnitude 6.0 in the next 50 years. That's as specific as they're getting. And then bigger than 6.0 because they estimate that New Madrid was an 8.2 if there had been a Richter scale back in 1812. So 10% chance of this being repeated. That's in the 50-year period. So people live in New Madrid. There are predictions that we're going to get hit. And the people in New Madrid don't think much about earthquakes. Very, very little. They're here on the river, pleasant little town. They have lives to lead. And that's pretty much the story of most people in the New Madrid quake zone. Lives to lead. So earthquakes in St. Louis and Missouri. I'm Doug Schneider. I'm doing some events coming up for the prime timers. I'll be repeating a free Zoom talk on haunted St. Louis, and then a visit to an exhibit on architecture at Wash U at the Mildred Lane Kemper Museum, followed by an optional lunch at Wash U after looking at the vibrant period of architecture in St. Louis from the 1930s to the 1970s. And then ethnic dining. I don't know if you've ever been to Switzerland, but this is a device that makes raclette, Swiss dish. So ethnic dining, a free Zoom talk on that coming up. And then a visit in December to SLAM, which is the St. Louis Art Museum. They're doing a big exhibit on African art. That's coming up. And this is the end of the talk. And I'm going to end the show and see if I can end the recording. Stop the recording.